Massive Bitcoin reserve warning. More and more voices are now speaking out very critically about the Bitcoin reserve strategy that's being planned in the U.S. Mark Godwill is now the next person to issue a massive warning. And you really have to take these warnings seriously, because there are warnings that can be ignored, like those from the Ripple Foundation, which attacks Bitcoin and whatever. But there are also really solid points, like those from Jack Dorsey or from Mark Godwill, who definitely has some very, very good points. Bitcoin opposes government, separate state, and money. That Bitcoin has been saying against big government actions. And now, all of a sudden, the same people come out of the hole and are begging. Here, the states and the governments are screaming, Donald Trump, please make a Bitcoin reserve strategy. Scott Bessent, please buy it. Bitcoin for the U.S. And that just doesn't add up. He points out that people have an interest in pumping their bags. But in doing so, they forget the big vision. Jack Dorsey has said exactly the same thing, that people are putting their bags ahead of the big vision of Bitcoin. Jack Dorsey might leave Bitcoin if this persists. Then he will leave the Bitcoin project. Mark Godwill even goes a step further and says that this could have serious consequences. If states get too involved here, the distribution of Bitcoin is also at risk. Let's take a look at what he has to say, whether we really need to take these warnings seriously or if it's just exaggerated fiat nonsense, like with the Ripple Foundation. But I can tell you right now, this isn't just exaggerated Ripple, fiat, or anything like that. These are the points being raised here. It's very, very important to at least think about it. But hey, folks, I don't want to bore you to death. Check out what he's massively criticizing about Bitcoin, especially regarding a Bitcoin reserve strategy.
Is that, generally, we're really terrible to our citizens and really terrible to the citizens of the world. We're arguably, the greatest, terrorist organization in the world. And here we are, Bitcoiners having, done 14 years of let's end the Fed. Now we're here saying, please, Mr. Bessent, put Bitcoin on the books. Let's mend the Fed, America, woo-hoo-hoo. Now that we got our guy in there. And it's like, well.
He basically says that here, right at this point, USA, the worst criminals are the ones responsible for major crimes against humanity. And that they've obviously done a whole lot of crap here in the past. And if you really take a look here, the Americans aren't really the freedom lovers that they always project outward. They've gotten really involved in wars and so on. It could, of course, be that Donald Trump has a different agenda now and so on. If we look at the last presidents, it hasn't been so great here. I always hope for the best and all that, but I often find myself, to be honest, a bit too naive, and of course, that's driven a lot by the excitement. And he clearly said, hey, it can't be that the biggest criminals against humanity can suddenly make an obituary. And then the people here suddenly start where just a few years ago they said, here's the thing. We want to shut down the central banks, and suddenly here you have the USA cheering. All the representatives of the USA are cheering that they should please buy even more Bitcoin here. But they forget about the whole story. That basically in the last 10 years, 20, 30 years, the USA wasn't exactly known for its freedom-loving mindset or anything like that, but was actually involved in a lot of really terrible crimes here. And that's basically just the big warning. He's not saying, hey, this shouldn't happen at all. He just wants to give people here a reality check. And I think that's a really, really good task, to do a reality check here, to just ask the right questions. I am too, for a Bitcoin reserve strategy. I think it would be awesome when a reserve strategy comes. Also think that's important for the future of America. That's important for the future of Germany. It's important for the future of every major country. But in the end, it's also true that Bitcoin is a tool that makes you independent from leaders that should make you independent from the state. And you shouldn't necessarily put all your energy into that, to cheer on any states here or anything. He's probably also mainly talking about Senator Loomis and Michael Saylor and such players, that they're definitely putting a lot of energy into it to basically push America forward, that they're buying a lot of Bitcoin here. Well, it's good if it's more on that side, that he says, hey, make sure as individuals that you're well prepared. But don't really cheer on the people who have truly enslaved you for decades and have indeed done a lot of bad things to you. Actually, they systematically robbed you with inflation. And suddenly it's the Godwill guys, just because they have the same asset as you. And now you can also massively benefit from your bags.
Well, why? Why are we doing that? Why are we encouraging it, right? Bitcoin is for enemies, sure. Of course, but that doesn't mean we need to encourage and lobby our enemies to buy Bitcoin. Like, we can just not do anything to try to filter them out. Or, I've never proposed let's kick these guys off the base layer, or, you know, let's go find BlackRock's, you know, address and fork it off. You know, I've never suggested that publicly. You know, hey, if you want to do that, you know, go ahead. But it's not something I've ever, you know, as I've never perpetuated, because I understand Bitcoin is a permissionless system.
So he's basically saying that he understands Bitcoin is a permissionless system, that all can join, that Bitcoin is also for enemies. So it's also for enemies. And that's really the crazy thing about Bitcoin. That means even terrorists, even people you might not think highly of, they can also participate in Bitcoin. Even BlackRock can participate in Bitcoin. Donald Trump can participate in Bitcoin. The Taliban can participate in Bitcoin. Everyone can participate in Bitcoin. There are no exclusion criteria. There is no such criterion of ways you have a blue sweater, you have a green sweater. And only people with green sweaters are allowed to participate. He still says, just because it's permissionless, because it's hostile, because everyone is allowed to participate here. Doesn't that mean that BlackRock is now the one? Governments, Donald Trump, Scott Bessons, and so on, you don't have to cheer for them and push this whole thing forward. He's just asking, why are we doing this? And in the end, you also have to understand Mark Godwill here, basically his history too. He's also kind of connected with Whitney Webb, the investigative journalist, intricately woven. And of course, they also have a lot of harsh theses and harsh theories that are sometimes put forward. That there are, for example, world conspiracies. Or that, for example, BlackRock is really, really bad. And to a large extent, that's definitely true. They also talk about all the big asset managers, including the state. And what do I know? That they obviously don't act in the interest of the people. And you always have to have a good assessment or a good, let's say, relationship to the statements. That means all the statements have a true part. But here, it's probably always a bit exaggerated. So in the end, it's being talked about here. That, of course, BlackRock has its own interests. Then you go into a whole bunch of other interviews. And that BlackRock, in the end, isn't really a net positive for Bitcoin with the Bitcoin ETFs. So that means, in the end, BlackRock could also be responsible for that. That in the end, the consensus is being altered. That's exactly what I mean here. Then it can basically be forged here, because it's stated in the ETF conditions. That BlackRock then has the Bitcoin ETFs in its possession. They can basically just forge it. That if BlackRock somehow collects 5 million Bitcoins, then they can forge here. They can forge away 5 million Bitcoins. And so, also, there's a risk of centralization with the representatives like Coinbase, who are basically handling the custody or storage of the Bitcoins. That's definitely the next point that you have to look at critically. That doesn't lead to that Bitcoin is collapsing or something. No, Bitcoin won't fail because of that. And these are really all concerns that you really have to think through. But still, BlackRock can't just change the Bitcoin network. These are just things that you have to mention in the end. You also have to say that BlackRock, if you're not good actors here, which we can just assume for now, from Mark Godwill's side, that still leads to that the Bitcoin price is going up. Even if the USA doesn't have a good incentive here and maybe has some dirty laundry, then there's an adoption happening in the USA. Still, that leads to the Bitcoin price going up. And when the Bitcoin price goes up, a lot of new people will come into the Bitcoin space who maybe don't have anything to do with the USA directly. That means indirectly, the enemies will also contribute, that the Bitcoin price keeps going up. And of course, that adoption is moving forward, that the network continues to evolve, that there are more second layer solutions, that basically the development is pushing forward here, that there's more acceptance and a lot more to come. Even though you definitely have to stay critical here, and you can and should criticize the whole thing. And you really have to pay attention to such warnings. And that definitely should be addressed. And you definitely should think about that. Because I don't think we all need to start protesting or anything like that right now. To say, hey, the US can't hold Bitcoin now. BlackRock is really, really bad, and so on. Of course, they're not, let's say, perfect and so on. But Bitcoin will find its way, and when Bitcoin really goes mainstream, then we have to accept it. That the US holds Bitcoin, then we have to accept it. That BlackRock holds Bitcoin. The only thing I totally agree with him on here, we don't necessarily have to proactively step up and basically cheering on Larry Fink and Donald Trump and so on. Like it's the Messiah now. Like they're the Bitcoin gods or something. And in the end, a lot of people do that. The fan culture is emerging. And that's really, really very important to keep in mind. That Donald Trump and Larry Fink and BlackRock and so on are just people that you should still look at critically, and that we shouldn't be setting up an altar here. And now we shouldn't be mumbling our prayers to Larry Fink and Donald Trump and basically idolizing these guys. Hey folks, pump. Now please give me the Bitcoin price, because then I'll get even richer and so on. But you should really look at it from a long-term perspective.
System, you know, you want to do taproot assets, put dollars on Bitcoin. Go ahead. I can't stop you. And I wouldn't really want to implement anything that would stop you. But I don't know why we're, lobbying. Well, actually, I'm sorry. I take that back, Danny. I know why we're lobbying, because we want our fucking bags to be pumped the fuck up. That's why we're doing it. But at the expense of what? At the expense of the ability for Bitcoin to be more distributed amongst the world. Like, not that many people own Bitcoin. It is decently. It's very distributed for sure compared to most currencies. And obviously no one has the ability to print more of it on its own, which is really cool. That's what's so powerful about it. But like, most people don't own Bitcoin.
I don't even believe that, 5 million people own.
That's what is indeed so strong. But most people aren't suited for Bitcoin because it requires a deep understanding of technology and finance, which many find challenging. I don't think that approximately around 5 million individuals are indeed well suited for it. That the Bitcoin network is already pretty well distributed is something that has continued to improve over time. It will be better distributed. Bitcoin differs from fiat. Fiat worsens distribution. Bitcoin improves it due to its limit. Fiat has a worse spread. Bitcoin has a better spread. Bitcoin is limited when you spend it. Then the Bitcoins are just gone. And that leads to the fact that over time, Bitcoin will be distributed better and better. But he says, wait, Bitcoin could be distributed even better. If people wouldn't start here, then the whole thing, let's say gurus, all the Trumps, all the Larry Finks, and so on, to cheer it on. And if they would proactively promote the whole thing here with the entire Bitcoin reserve strategy. He basically just says, hey, don't necessarily promote it proactively, but stay critical about it. And I'm just relaying his theses, his analyses, so you can understand what's going on here. And you really have to decide for yourselves. You can see what's going on here. And you really have to decide for yourselves. What are doing cheering for Donald Trump here? If you think that's good, if you think that's bad, if you see critically, you have to decide that for yourselves. My job is basically to prepare all of this for you. And you really have to decide for yourselves what you do with this information.
The whole Bitcoin centralization within, the brokers and the exchanges and whatever. And it's like, I just don't think there are actually that many people that, self-sovereignly hold Bitcoin and, would be able to transact with it if things go crazy. Bitcoin becomes very expensive. Everyone wants to use it. All of a sudden, fees go through the roof. It's like, okay, cool. You have 0.01 Bitcoin. You're going to spend how much of it to make a transaction? It's not really.
A lot of people own the IOUs, but I don't think that many people.
And that's a great point. And here you can also see that Mark Godwill doesn't want to scare anyone. But he actually just wants what's best for you. He just wants to motivate you to hold Bitcoin in self-custody, to take Bitcoin into your own hands. By the way, let me show you my view so you can see where I am right now. I'm here at the beach. I'm here corner. In the end, Mark Godwill just wants what's best for you. He just says that most people here don't hold Bitcoin in self-custody. He says that a lot of people hold Bitcoin on exchanges. Yes, that's true, and it's also not true. A lot of people do hold Bitcoin in self-custody, but the numbers could definitely still be higher. That means he's just motivating you here. Hey, keep Bitcoin in self-custody. Get a hardware wallet. Then you really would be ungovernable here. And then the worst case scenario could really happen here. That means they say that Bitcoin is an insurance for emergencies, when things really get crazy. For example, if hyperinflation hits, if war breaks out, or whatever. But now let's assume a global crisis is really coming, a global chaos scenario. And what happens if you don't hold your Bitcoin in self-sovereign custody right now, not on your own hardware wallet, but suddenly you have your Bitcoin on an exchange? He then basically warns that you won't be able to access your Bitcoin. That means you won't get any use out of them. Bitcoin, then. Bitcoin isn't an insurance for you. It's just something that you can't use right now in a crisis situation. Of course, it might still be a good store of value, but it won't get you out of the crisis. Secondly, he brings up the second point where he basically criticizes Bitcoin in general, where he then says, when a whole lot of people suddenly want to use Bitcoin all at once, then the fees will just about skyrocket. And if we don't, we need to think about how to push Bitcoin adoption forward here, how we build second layer solutions and so on. Then it could be that in such crisis situations, the Bitcoin network gets overloaded. Because if, for example, a massive crisis were to break out tomorrow and suddenly everyone wants to use Bitcoin, then people who have small amounts of Bitcoin might not even be able to afford the transactions. I'm talking about situations where, I don't know, you have 0.1 Bitcoin and now the transaction costs are skyrocketing. Suddenly, a transaction could cost $200, $300 or something like that. Bitcoin has, and now the transaction costs are somehow sky high. Then suddenly a transaction could cost $200, $300 or something like that. Then, for a lot of people, it might just not be affordable. To get a transaction through, or it takes a really, really long time, or it's just really, really bad. And those are basically just points he's bringing up that definitely won't make Bitcoin fail. That definitely shouldn't make you lose sleep over it. But they should really make you question and rethink whether it's really that great when so many big players get involved and how the Bitcoin community should deal with it. I mean, I always see it as pretty straightforward in the end. I just take it as it comes. BlackRock and the US can come in. Idolization of politicians and Trump is problematic. And yeah, the simping and all the idolization of politicians and stuff and of Donald Trump, I also find a bit problematic. So you really have to look at that critically. So that's definitely something you can take away from this. But hey, drop a comment and let me know how you see it. And now an important point if you see it the same way here. Mark Godwill and holding Bitcoin in a self-sovereign way. If you want, I'll put a link down below for a Dresser hardware wallet if you really want to be ungovernable, where you're completely independent from the exchange, from a government or whatever, where no one can censor your Bitcoin. 21 Bitcoin offers up to 20% off fees at Bitcoin Hotel. Let me know what you think. See you soon. See you. Peace out.